Every single person that goes, hell yeah, I can't believe there's no tax on tips, are the exact same people who complain about, like, why is there a tip on everything? I go to the coffee shop and the barista hands me a coffee and then there's a 25% tip on my coffee. I don't understand it. It's like, yeah, dude, what do you think is going on? Oh, somebody needs to do it. What the? This has 500,000 views?
Across the internet, thousands and thousands of people are making the same plea.
Yo, can somebody just do it? Can somebody, anybody, just do it?
Somebody's got to do it. There has to be somebody out there that is willing to do it.
Who's going to take the initiative to do it? We all know it needs to be done, and somebody needs to do it.
If someone does it before the summertime, it's going to be like that one summer when everyone was playing Pokemon Go and everyone was a friend.
Gotta do it. For the good of everybody.
Do it, please. You know exactly what I'm talking about.
Every minute counts.
Yeah, they're talking about Nike. They're talking about Nike shoes, right? That's what they're talking about.
I'm not saying somebody should. Nobody should.
I 100% dare you to name one thing that you hope happens in 2025.
That's crazy.
On X, TikTok, Instagram, and in comment sections all over, people are begging, pleading for someone out there to just do it. In these pleas, the subject is never stated, the action is never spelled out, but somehow we all know exactly what's being said. But in case you are somehow still in the dark, these memes are about unaliving Trump. And sorry to say it in very dumb algo speak terms, but I don't want this video to get taken down from YouTube. What we're witnessing is not just an absurd or ironic online trend. It's something much, much deeper. We are living in a political tinderbox. Trump is back in power, enacting policies that undermine civil liberty.
Nike team, marketing team having a crisis? No, it was literally, they already had that in the UK because the UK had a marathon, like a very famous marathon in England, I think. And at the end line, it said, never again until next year. And all of the pro-Israel people lost their minds where they were like, how dare you? How dare you say never again? That's our thing. Like, you're literally hoping that another happens. You're hoping that another October 7 happens. Clearly, that's what you want. It was so insane. There have been so many schizo moments that have taken place since October 7, 2023. And because they just like endlessly compound on top of one another, we have no capacity to like look at any of these moments and go, yeah, that was really weird, huh? Yeah, and Nike apologized too, which is, oh my God. It's like I will never forget that in the immediate aftermath of October 7, Bill Smokes Crackman, also known as Bill A. Pac-Man, came out and was like, we have to basically kill or exile every Harvard student that participated in the writing of a think piece that was so identical to the Haaretz editorial board's opinion after October 7 that it almost looked plagiarized, okay? Like, it was a one-to-one verbatim copy of basically what I've said since October 7 as well, where it's like these kinds of violent events are only happening because of Israel's 75-year occupation at the time. And that was such an insane thing to hear, I guess, for the likes of Bill Smoke Crackman and many others, that they just had doxing trucks. They instantly, all of these like Knesset grant funded organizations like Canary Mission and shit that just straight up dox people. Like it's insane. It's basically like having a little Mossad agent operating inside of U.S. soil, but their job is not to like kill you with a pager or something, but instead is just to like hopefully ruin your life, that you're never employed for the rest of your life, and then like maybe someone else will kill you in the process. And those guys were running around with like doxing trucks on college campuses. Chatters in this community were getting doxed for participating in any kind of protest whatsoever that wasn't like that just simply wasn't demanding that Israel murder every Palestinian child. It was so crazy. It was such an insane moment. And there have been insane moments like that, like almost every other week or every 2 weeks since then. Oh.
Environmental
here's an
protections, and our
example.
economy. Elon Musk is gutting the federal government while billionaires rob us blind. Institutions that were built to serve as guardrails are bending and breaking, while Democrats are not even symbolically resisting. The courts are caving, the press is depleted, and the idea of accountability feels like a joke. Dissent is being criminalized, speech is being surveilled, and legal U.S. residents are literally being deported for thought crimes. These memes are symbols of a society teetering on the edge. Memes have always reflected cultural moods, but these posts are about something more than that. They tap into this belief that the system is beyond repair and that nothing short of a seismic, violent shift will change the direction that we're heading in. In this video, I'm going to attempt to dissect this belief and unpack exactly what led us here. I'm not going to get into whether these memes and posts are moral, legal, or even advisable, but what I want you to understand is where these memes are coming from and what they say about the cultural and political moment that we're currently living in. Because these memes are not just about unaliving Trump. They are about collective trauma, political cynicism, our decaying faith in democratic, so much more. To start, I want to talk about exactly how and when millions of people lost faith in the system. This was not an overnight phenomenon. There were pivotal events over the past few years that pushed people to this moment. And I don't think that you can look at the "someone should do it" memes without examining the major cultural and political turning points that we've recently lived through. To begin with, we have to go back to March 2020 when COVID hit. And before you tune out, because I said the word COVID, listen to me. The year 2020 is actually a time in history that the entire US government, the mainstream media, and pretty much everyone in power has spent billions and billions of dollars waging a massive propaganda war to try to make you forget. And that propaganda campaign has worked on a lot of you, because the period in time that most of America has memory hold was actually pretty revolutionary. In the early months of spring 2020, when COVID began to spread, the US witnessed a momentary glimpse into a more equitable society. The entire US government was taking care of its people in ways that it hadn't before. The US government has spent so many years since blasting the public with propaganda that a lot of people today have forgotten just how revolutionary 2020 was. Policies that we were always told were absolutely impossible in America suddenly came to fruition. I want to go through a few notable ones. There was the CARES Act, enacted in March 2020, which provided direct financial assistance to struggling workers by extending unemployment benefits and offering an additional $600 per week. The Families First Coronavirus Response Act, which also passed in 2020, mandated paid sick leave and increased funding for food assistance programs, lifting countless people out of poverty. On a state level in 2020, states like New Mexico
Can't have that. Too much.
began offering.
And even then, there was so much more given to businesses too. It was like as an incredible Hassan. I do not agree with anything you say ever. I doubt it. Hassan, I don't agree with you. You have a very bigoted opinion on this subject. I hate you, Hassan. You literally said that yesterday. Okay. Well, I love you, chatter. I love you. Do you disagree with that? I believe you should love yourself, just like I love you. Now what? I think you are handsome and special. Checkmate. Do you disagree? Let's continue.
Bring free childcare, a policy that lifted approximately 120,000 people above the poverty line. The state even began taking budget surplus directly from oil and gas revenue to fund early childhood education. This stuff was so progressive, I actually can't even imagine it happening now, which is again because of the downstream effects of all of this propaganda trying to make us forget this stuff. Other states, including Connecticut, implemented universal free school meal programs, ensuring that all students had access to hot, nutritious meals, regardless of income, for the first time. These policies and dozens more resulted in a...
How do you feel about Taylor Lorenz? I love her. She is I think she's the best media and culture journalist out there, straight up. And I think that her getting fired from or getting let go from Washington Post for a private post, for a private Instagram story she made about calling Joe Biden a criminal correctly, okay, was a major issue. Like, mainstream media lost the best media and culture reporter out there, okay? Straight up. You might not agree with everything that she says. You might get mad at her from time to time, but she is a brilliant journalist, okay? It does not matter. She is a brilliant journalist at a time when, and I say this all the time, at a time when there is so much need to understand what goes on in the online space, because the online space is the most important part of people's lives now. It sucks, but it's the truth. Just like it was the truth when she called Joe Biden a criminal, for the record, in a private Instagram story for her friends only, for her close friends only.
Significant reduction of food insecurity across America. In 2020, SNAP benefits were increased and helped feed over 15 million young people. From 2020 to 2021, the expansion of food programs across the U.S. resulted in 2.4 million households no longer being food insecure. I can't explain how life-changing this stuff was for millions and millions of people in America. And people weren't just being fed. Millions were also suddenly able to get health care in 2020. The government made it easier than ever to enroll in Medicare and Medicaid, which resulted in millions of people who had been previously unable to afford health insurance suddenly able to get care. The government invested $145 million in expanding telehealth services, meaning millions of disabled and housebound people could finally access care, some for the first time in decades. In 2020, housing insecurity plummeted thanks to federal policies like the Treasury Department's ERA program, which provided over $46 billion to support housing stability for renters. There was a nationwide eviction moratorium, and the government rolled out a suite of tenant protections. California, actually, where I live, helped thousands of previously unhoused people gain access to permanent housing. I don't want to go on too much, but these are just a sliver of the policies that we saw the government enact during the early days of the pandemic. And they showed everyone in America, for the first time ever, what was actually possible if we allocated just a fraction of the billions and billions of billions of dollars that we spend on the military and things like tax cuts for the rich towards the public good. I just want to talk about 2020 a tiny bit more for a couple minutes because, again, there's this multi-billion-dollar propaganda camp, all of this stuff. And it's really important to remember what happened that year if you want to understand why we are where we are today. In 2020, as millions of people shifted to remote work or faced unemployment, they began to question traditional structures of labor and productivity. People started to realize that the economy could function differently and that it could prioritize human well-being over relentless productivity. These mass realizations sparked widespread discussions about systemic inequality and the role of the government in addressing it. Mutual aid networks flourished throughout 2020. Communities organized to provide each other with food, medical supplies, and support. We were all encouraged to mask and protect each other from airborne disease, not just kill our neighbors and service workers with unmitigated COVID spread. These grassroots efforts exemplified the potential for collective action and solidarity. In 2020, we also saw the rise of the nature is healing meme, which spoke to the environmental impact humans were having on our planet. As skies cleared with fewer people commuting to their offices, carbon emissions dropped, and many wondered out loud, what if we didn't go back to normal? What if normal was the problem? Climate disasters, from wildfires in California to hurricanes devastating Central America, reminded us all how urgent the climate crisis had become. The climate movement gained momentum in 2020 as people started to argue that the economy should be restructured to be both greener and fairer. As everyone became extremely online, people began to leverage the internet as a powerful social justice tool. TikTok became a tool for IRL organizing and protest planning. Masses of people began connecting with each other online and building support networks. Suddenly, people realized that the internet could be a weapon against elite systems. The online world became the default reality overnight, and people leveraged social platforms to speak truth to power. The murder of George Floyd in May 2020 served as a catalyst for nationwide protests against racial injustice and police brutality. Millions participated in demonstrations demanding accountability and systemic change. The sheer scale of protests in 2020 reflected a profound shift. In 2020, phrases like white privilege, systemic oppression, and defund the police entered the mainstream. Institutions from corporations to universities rushed to acknowledge their role in perpetuating injustice. A lot of it was performative, but some of it was real. Again, in 2020, for the first time, millions of people began questioning the legitimacy of systems that were long seen as unchangeable. Why is healthcare tied to employment? Why do billionaires exist in a world where children go hungry? Why do we spend more on police and prisons than on schools and housing. 2020 marked a turning point, a realization that the world as it was wasn't working for most people, and that another, better world was possible, one where people are valued more than profits. Millions of people began to see clearly what had been hidden in plain sight for decades. Of course, not everyone embraced this moment. The backlash was real and predictable. The term woke was treated like a slur in some circles and a way to dismiss the very real empathy and awareness that defined this era. But the pushback only confirmed that a major power shift was underway. People were finally beginning to seek systemic change, but then the boot came down hard. Biden was elected that fall and began working overtime to dismantle.
One of the, I don't know, maybe I criticize Dems too much and people will get mad at me for saying this, but I think two key moments that have completely destroyed any sort of American progressivism. The two key moments were, I think, first, Obama shuttering Obama for America, okay, and refusing to use the grassroots movement that actually gave him this massive victory that we haven't seen since, and hyper focusing on doing third way neoliberalism when he was in power, and like maybe a little bit of incremental change. And I think the other moment was Biden. I've talked about this quite a bit, but everything that Taylor said here, especially on top of the mass grassroots initiatives that took place, like people storming the streets and losing their minds over this like horrifying reality of police brutality, the Black Lives Matter movements, the anger and resentment people felt, that amounted to nothing. Biden came in, ran on funding the police more, and in the process, they just bullied and yelled at like their activist base over and over again. They didn't even do 8 Can't Wait, which was supposed to be like a counter, like a neutered version of the demands that were being made. And they spent every moment of that media cycle shitting on the activist left. So for people whose first foray into social justice that was, born out of the COVID lockdowns and the Black Lives Matter movement, for those people, they took it to the streets. They did everything right. They took it to the streets. They protested. They got beat up. They got tear gassed. And then they held their nose and voted for this geriatric man. They did everything right. They did it by the book. They did civil disobedience. And on top of that, they went and they voted. And nothing came of it. Not a fraction, not a margin of change, not a crumb of change. I think that kind of neutering of progressive idealism is really dangerous. Why would people not feel betrayed? The very fact that there are still people like myself and you guys in this community that are still maintaining some sense of hope is shocking. Okay? The resilience that people in this community have and the commitment that they have to continuously organizing is unironically not the norm. No wonder people become more nihilistic every day. And that nihilism leads people down a dangerous path of right-wing reactionary sentiment. Not saying I agree with this, but thoughts. President Biden, greatest progressive president in my lifetime. Okay, dude. Russia since Reagan. This is the mentally ill JFK descendant, right? That's who this guy is. He's the TikTok heartthrob. He carries himself like a fucking crackhead yoga mom. But I think because he's like a Kennedy, his grandson, yeah, because he's a Kennedy, like, and he kind of looks handsome, people just give him a lot more attention than he deserves. He is a TikTok heartthrob, yeah. He also said he wants to do his own aunt. Nice. The Democrats are actively making people more apathetic, as you said. I fear that the Democrats being so dense right now will create yet another generation of doomers, of new voters who genuinely believe politicians can't be moved left until 3-4 election cycles go past and they completely give up. I hope that they instead seek to make change locally and through direct action, but I doubt that'll solve this problem entirely for normies. Yeah. And when will you be collabing? I don't know.
Dismantled the social safety net that had expanded in 2020. This is when we saw the beginning of the disenchantment that would ultimately result in these assassins.
What the fuck is Bernard doing? He's just on crack, dude. He's smoking on that loud. That's what he's doing. He's like, you know, when you're in the August years of your life, you just kind of let people do whatever the fuck they want to do. This is what Bernie's on. He's on that tip. He's like, passed by unanimous consent, i.e. he didn't specifically vote yes, he just didn't vote no. No, I understand. He's not even entertaining fucking saying something about it.
Assassination memes. Immediately after taking office, Biden falsely
What's wrong with getting rid of tax on tips? I don't know, man. So many fucking things. The problem with tips, the problem with the way that the tip structure works is that it's unsustainable. And it allows the fucking business. Every single person that goes, hell yeah, I can't believe there's no tax on tips, are the exact same people who complain about, like, why is there a tip on everything? I go to the coffee shop and the barista hands me a coffee and then there's a 25% tip on my coffee. I don't understand it. It's like, yeah, dude, what do you think is going on? Don't spin the iPad in my direction. Yeah, there you go. There you go. Let's not force business owners to actually pay living fucking wages to their goddamn employees and instead put this tip culture shit on steroids.
Declared the pandemic over in order to force people back to work. Officials began blasting the public with far-right propaganda on COVID, lying to them about the disease, and convincing people to sacrifice their health and their bodies for the stock market. The message was clear. Forget 2020. It's back to work, now with even fewer health protections and no meaningful treatments for the brand new, highly transmissible airborne virus that ravages your heart, neurological system, and immune system and is still spreading at pandemic levels, even today in 2025. Jamie Cohen, a media studies professor at CUNY Queens College, told me, quote, Biden rushed the end of the safety protocols in part because people started.
Yeah, look. Call me selfish. I don't care. I'm unironically going to be tipping 60% everywhere if no tax on tips gets signed. None of us were tipping based on taxes, based on the total of the bills and service. This is just rent seeking through the government to make non-tipped employees subsidize tipped employees. And this can be remedied by lowering the tip amount. I'm out of this conversation. I already have told you, I think tips it's charity and it should be done if you have the capacity to do so. That's why I tip at that level. Where I worked at many restaurants and it sucks when at the end of the day, your boss takes 6 to 8% of my tips. We're not getting rid of tips. You know that. And if every billionaire corporation isn't paying taxes, why make the poorest hurt more? Do you not understand this is a race to the bottom? You've completely given up. This is how the Republicans win. You're like, fuck it, you know? All it does is keep your wages low. That's it. We will never get fucking permanent increases to the minimum wage.
To gain a sense of consciousness. Biden and other elite leaders realized the collective power that the public, especially online. People were realizing that we too could have the social safety net that many other countries in the world benefit from. And it's a conscious choice by people in power not to let us have it. People on the left and the right also gained clarity about who is really in charge and who controls those levers. But while Biden could force people back to work in unsafe conditions, he couldn't force them to be less online. And by 2021, we were already seeing that there was no longer any distinction between the offline and online worlds. The wall between the two was completely obliterated. And nowhere was this more apparent than at the Capitol on January 6, 2021. As protesters stormed the building that day, they carried flags and wore t-shirts emblazoned with memes like Pepe the Frog and the Kekistan flag, which originated in extremist online subcultures. Reactionary influencers live streamed the insurrection as fans rewarded them with digital gifts and money, depending on how far they made it into the building. This convergence of internet culture and physical action signaled a new era where internet...
Look, I will continue on the tipping thing. Like I said, I will continue to max out. But I also still understand that at the legislative level, we should be moving away from tipping and instead to permanent living wages, an increase of the minimum wage. Okay? That's it. I'm still maxing out. Make no mistake. But, you know, that's it.
Ideologies could precipitate real-world upheaval at scale. The insurrection proved without a doubt that the internet's influence extended far beyond screens and could manifest in tangible, often violent actions. The event also marked a moment where a significant portion of the populace began to perceive violence as a viable means to achieve political ends. Surveys conducted around this period revealed that approximately 40% of Republicans and 41% of independents believed that violence against the government could be justified. This idea that violence is the answer or that violence is necessary for political change is not typical in a functioning democracy. And this was back in 2021. A Pew Research poll at the time showed that the American public's confidence in the government had reached its lowest point in decades. There was a widespread perception by late 2021 that our government was driven almost wholly by self-interest and corruption, leading to distrust in the entire system. Ariel Hassel, assistant professor of communication and media at the University of Michigan, conducted a study at the time that found that cynicism was skyrocketing, and pretty much everyone was starting to see our political system as a farce. This cynicism was being seen outside the political arena too, in things like the rise of meme stocks and the great GameStop pump around this time. Online communities like the subreddit Wall Street Bets were suddenly bringing institutional stock market investors and trading apps like Robinhood to their knees. People, especially young people, began to see that everything could be manipulated and nothing mattered. The entire idea of working a 9-to-5 for 40 years just to one day retire in a meager house before dying of lack of health insurance seems like a scam when you could just make millions overnight pumping AMC without ever even going to college. The crypto boom throughout 2021 and 2022 exacerbated this nihilistic sentiment. This period led to what was essentially a mass blackpilling, a term that denotes a deep-seated cynicism and disillusionment with systemic structures. This disillusionment manifested in various ways. Most people, including most liberals and leftists even, retreated into full-on COVID denial, overwhelmed by the scale of public health challenges and a apparent indifference of leadership to mass death. They drank down right-wing propaganda. Others vocalized their dissent, trying to explain that COVID never ended. It didn't just go away. The government just wants you to ignore it and to keep working. They only face backlash and abuse. This environment of gaslighting and suppression amplified people's feelings of isolation. By 2022, pressure built and people could feel that life was never going back to normal. The ground had fundamentally shifted beneath them. Something felt off and wrong. It was different, but it was hard to pinpoint what. These feelings were immortalized in the meme that year that became known as the vibe shift. Denialism took hold, and this is when the memory holding of 2020 really accelerated. People were pressured to rip off their masks, throw caution to the wind, and stop caring about others. The public dealt with their collective trauma through hedonistic nihilism and deep narcissism. This was also reflected in a slew of memes that became popular around that time, all of which prioritized centering yourself above others. Pretty much everyone had main character syndrome, and there was this heavy refocus on individualism. The juxtaposition of mass death from unmitigated COVID spread and government inaction, coupled with a seemingly rigged financial and political system, fostered a sense of betrayal. Nothing matters anymore, so you might as well enjoy life. Unalive your neighbor by infecting them with a deadly disease. Who cares about vulnerable people anymore? Just get yours. Our entire economic and political system is being held together by a string, and all you can depend on is yourself. But while everyone was dancing their pain away in 2022, elites were reclaiming their power. In October 2022, Elon Musk arrived at Twitter HQ in San Francisco carrying a bathroom sink. In the first few months after taking over the company, he rolled back DEI policies and allowed hordes of white supremacists and extremists back onto his platform. He revamped the algorithm to boost billionaires and downrank progressive activists. He banned a slew of journalists, including me, for reporting critically on him and other tech leaders. Far-right extremists that were previously marginalized were suddenly waging successful comebacks by capitalizing on the manufactured backlash to woke. Alex Jones was replatformed in 2023 as influencers like Andrew Tate surged in popularity.
Yeah, it became a campaign of vengeance, which is reactionary politics in its purest form, where living in filth is seen as a virtue, being uncool is seen as a virtue, like Elon, the way he presents himself, the way he carries himself. Like anything that triggers the libs, including shitting in your own diapers and smelling like dookie, is now, as long as it like offends liberals around, or maybe liberals imagined, all of a sudden is now a cool thing. Very weird phenomena. I don't understand it. It's like anti-human. All of this is now seen as a positive.
Billionaires like Musk were able to operate seemingly with impunity, and Democrats who were ostensibly in charge weren't doing anything about it. By the summer of 2023, you could see this nihilism and anti-elite sentiment creeping out all over the internet. In June 2023, the implosion of the Ocean Gate Titan submarine, piloted by billionaire Stockton Rush on a vanity expedition to view the Titanic, became an immediate meme. Within minutes of the news breaking, people were joking about imploding billionaires all over TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram. People posted with glee about, quote, natural selection. They made playlists joking about it and posted lists of other billionaires they hoped would take a submarine ride. People weren't openly calling for billionaires to be executed yet, but they were certainly celebrating when they died. I would argue that the submarine memes of 2023 were the moment that it became clear that millions of people online believed that maybe the rich shouldn't make it out alive. That same month, we saw people rally around orcas who inexplicably began attacking and sinking yachts. Memes and parody news sites joked about the orcas literally eating the rich. By the end of that summer, Burning Man was engulfed in mud due to heavy rainfall, and the entire internet once again began relishing in rich people suffering. The perceived irony of a gathering that championed radical self-reliance yet attracted tech elites arriving in private jets and luxury RVs was too much. The Schadenfreude wasn't just merely about the festival. It reflected a broader societal disdain for the wealthy, particularly those seen as out of touch or hypocritical. Then October 7th happened. Palestinians who had been oppressed, tortured, and ethnically cleansed by Israel's apartheid regime for decades fought back. Israel responded by committing a live-streamed genocide for the entire world to see, slaughtering tens of thousands of innocent children and committing grave atrocities and war crimes. Israel murdered hundreds of journalists, bombed schools and hospitals, and did it all in the open for anyone with internet access to witness. But that's not how the mainstream media reported it. Suddenly, U.S. airwaves were flooded with pro-Israel propaganda. Papers like the New York Times began pushing outright lies and easily debunked hoaxes in an effort to manufacture consent for the war crimes and ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. College students and other people who spoke out against this were met with extreme violence from the police. Young students at Columbia University faced federal charges for peaceful protests, and the government under Biden began cracking down aggressively on speech. At the same time,
no, but he was such a good ally. Him and Ethan Klein are the two stalwart allies of the Palestinians, low key, but also high key. The greatest.
RICO charges were being levied at protesters fighting against Cop City in Atlanta, and people who spoke up about social justice were fired from their jobs and blacklisted from industries. It was a radicalizing moment on the internet. Suddenly, people could see that our system is actually totally comfortable with violence, as long as the violence is perpetuated against vulnerable and oppressed people. It's only violence against powerful people that's punished. Kyle Rittenhouse, for instance, was acquitted of all charges for shooting an anti-fascist protester dead, while peaceful college students were ending up in jail. Witnessing the most graphic and horrific war crimes in Palestine constantly via their phones also normalized violence to the American public in a way that I don't think it ever had been before. I think finally people were able to see exactly how violent and hypocritical the US empire is, and how cavalier people in power are about that hypocrisy. You can see these beliefs reflected in polls throughout 2023. For instance, a 2023 survey by the Public Religion Research Institute showed that about a quarter of U.S. citizens agreed that Americans, quote, may have to resort to violence in order to save our country. This was up sharply from just 15% in 2021. And I also just want to stress again how high both of these numbers are for a country that's theoretically a democracy. Like in normal democracies, you don't have these high numbers. By 2024, a pervasive sense of disillusionment had taken hold. Joe Biden's decision to seek re-election despite widespread concerns about his age and cognitive abilities caused people to question whether our democratic system was really working. His disastrous debate performance and revelations about the Democratic Party's efforts to downplay his mental issues only sowed more distrust. For most of 2024, it felt like we were a nation sleepwalking with no one at the helm. When Trump was shot at a Pennsylvania rally in July of 2024, blood wasn't even dry on his ear before it had become a meme. People bemoaned the fact that he hadn't turned his head even slightly to the side, which would have had deadly consequences. The assassination attempt normalized discourse about Trump's death and fed these overall nihilistic sentiments. Later that summer, throughout Kamala Harris's campaign, the Democratic Party further disenfranchised people by refusing to listen to voters' concerns about Gaza, COVID, and more. In what became an infamous meme in August 2024, Democratic delegates literally plugged their ears to drown out anti-genocide protesters. It sent a clear message to the American—
Oh God, this was such a classic. I've just realized by listening to her recount the incidents of the last several years, and I believe we are already living in barbarism. Yes.
American public, we will not listen to you, and we do not care what you have to say. People's growing disenfranchisement with the system extended to the electoral process itself. Polls at the time indicated that only 30—
I mean, it's the JFK quote, right? Those who make peaceful revolution impossible, make violent retribution inevitable. And that's where we're at, you know? Our campaign bent over backwards to accommodate them. It's such a fucking ridiculous lie that they were telling. And yes, I do blame the Democrats for this. Violent, not retribution, revolution. I apologize. Like, I do blame the Democrats for this because they are supposed to be the counterbalance to the growing fascist movement, okay? And they're not. They're participants. That's what Mike said. Yeah, that's a very classic quote that everyone says. I've said it many times as well. We didn't come up with it. JFK didn't even come up with it. He's just paraphrasing. I think Nelson Mandela has also said it, but obviously JFK wasn't paraphrasing Nelson Mandela. But many people have said it because it's correct. So this is what it is. It's like... Democrats don't realize that their controlled opposition positioning and the hurdle that they present themselves as to any sort of like serious progressive momentum in this country is leading people down this inevitability of adventurism and random sporadic bouts of violence that sometimes will be directional or ideologically leftist and in most circumstances will not. It's just, it's not real justice. And without some serious organizing, the inevitable backlash to that will shape the new fascist governance, the new fascist form of governance. Because the government will use any and every opportunity to expand its awesome powers. And I think we're going to see exactly what that looks like with the Palestinian movement and where it goes from this day on.
37% of Americans.
Karl Marx, stupid ass, thought pleb revolution would work in the USA. Okay, to be fair, he, much like many other revolutionary figures, was a bit of an Ameriboo of sorts. Also, at the time, the Republican Party in its inception was literally a proletarian party that talked about the abolition of chattel slavery in the South and the abolition of wage slavery in the North. Very different Republican Party back then. And he was parasocial for Abe. Little bro, he thought he could get responses from Abe Lincoln. Little bro thought, if I send him some letters, you know, maybe Abe will notice me. Notice me, Abe. Abe, notice me.
Americans believed the 2024 elections would be both honest and open. 43% had serious doubts about our democracy. These numbers reflect a significant decline in trust. This skepticism was exacerbated by concerns over media transparency and the manipulation of information. By the end of 2024, a record number of people reported feeling powerless and disillusioned, viewing our political system as irreparably broken and unresponsive to their needs. As the academic Jamie Cohen told me, quote, much like many authoritarian countries, people realized America is a democracy in name only. Then, on December 4th, 2024, United Health CEO Brian Thompson was shot dead in the street. Within days, the police had apprehended Luigi Mangione as their prime suspect. Even before his arrest, the killing became a meme, and millions rallied behind Mangione's alleged actions. The public and legal response to Mangione once again revealed the massive disparity between how people in power treat different victims of violence. He currently faces federal and state charges, including murder and terrorism. Attorney General Pam Bondi announced that the state would pursue the death penalty. Meanwhile, the week Mangione was arrested, Daniel Penny, a former white Marine, was acquitted after choking Jordan Neely, a black homeless man experiencing a mental health crisis on the subway, to death. As Cohen told me, quote, it felt like there was no such thing as penalty any longer, unless you're saying something that criticizes people in power or supports social justice.
Yep.
Just a few months later, in February 2025, the U.S. government responded to the escalating Tesla takedown protests with severe crackdowns, and officials began labeling acts of vandalism against Tesla cars as domestic terrorism. Trump warned that people who harmed Tesla cars could face up to 20 years in prison, potentially serving sentences in El Salvador. The FBI established a specialized task force to investigate incidents of Tesla car attacks. At the same time, innocent lawful residents of this country began getting deported for thought crimes. Chaotic tariff policies have plunged our economy into chaos. We have witnessed the massive undue firing of federal workers and are experiencing unprecedented crackdowns on speech. All of these tensions reached a boiling point by March when the "someone's gotta do it" memes really started to become pervasive. Posts endorsing political violence targeting Trump and, to a lesser extent, Elon Musk have racked up tens of millions of likes. These memes have become some of the most popular content online in recent months. By early April, outlets like the New York Post were already bemoaning the rising, quote, assassination culture on the left, as if the right hasn't embraced the same culture for years. The Network Contagion Research Institute and Rutgers University's Social Perception Lab recently issued a report about the rise in pro-assassination content online. The report found that 55% of left-of-center internet users considered the of Trump somewhat justified, while 48% felt the same about Elon Musk. The report explained that these attitudes are not isolated and are part of a broader political shift tied to feelings of powerlessness. The researchers emphasized the need for
It's kind of like this. Some people might get mad at me for saying this, but the Me Too movement happened because the legal system just was completely powerless in the face of powerful people using and abusing women whichever way they wanted to. People in positions of power were never getting properly prosecuted. And that is the reason why the Me Too movement came about, right? There was a point of inflection where I guess like the Harvey Weinstein situation was so overwhelming where people were just like, fuck this, right? And of course, as is the case with movements that are extrajudicial, movements that are outside of the justice system, the movements that are not systematized and processed, but mostly decentralized, it did actually get out of hand. Also, ironically enough, just like every other grassroots movement like Black Lives Matter, it was instantly co-opted and commodified by, I think it was Time's Up, which was entirely comprised of people that had worked with rapists in the past or ended up working with rapists later down the line, okay? Like powerful rapists. So that is what happened. And then the pendulum swung in the opposite direction because there was backlash to it because powerful people were able to universalize. Powerful people were able to universalize the blame and say, oh, they're not coming after me. They're coming after you as well. If you're like a random guy and you said nice tits to the counter at 7-Eleven, the cashier at 7-Eleven, like you're going to fucking be fired or whatever. They do this all the time. They do this with like cancel culture too. Like no like decentralized accountability can ever work. And I guess the reason why I'm bringing this up is because like this kind of stuff only happens because at a certain point people go, enough is enough. You know what I mean? There's only so much that people can withstand. There's only so much that that people will withstand until they just take matters in their own hands. And if you don't want that kind of like decentralized chaos and people taking justice, or you're not beating the misogynist allegations. What did I say that is misogynistic? I quite literally described the normalization of rape, sexual assault, and sexual harassment in regular workplaces by powerful people against their female counterparts and subordinates. And then I talked about how the justice system was not serving any justice to the victims. The nice tits thing felt odd. What? Oh, shut up. I can't even use a fucking example. I can't even use an example of someone being misogynistic, but not to the same fucking degree as like a serial rapist or a sexual assaulter, and how people in positions of power that wanted to avoid accountability from decentralized movements such as this one were able to universalize with ridiculous fears that like you would also get cooked in the process. That's the argument. How am I supposed to give an example of misogyny? You really need to ignore stupidity more? I agree. I probably should. What is fucking going on? Hold on one second. Anyway, let's continue.
proactive measures to counter this trend. They begged institutions to reinforce norms and promote, quote, constructive political dialogue. But that ship has sailed. Asking the public to uphold norms while Trump flouts due process on a near daily basis.
Oh, I believe this too. I've said this before as well. My longest standing belief is that since the anti-woke backlash started, if the Jeffrey Epstein was alive today, right-wingers would be tripping over themselves to rehabilitate his public image after an appearance on Joe Rogan podcast. And I think this is major proof of that. Yeah, I 100% believe this. I 100%. If Jeffrey Epstein didn't fucking get assassinated in prison and turned around and was like, I'm actually not woke. I'm actually a whistleblower, okay, against powerful individuals. Okay, and then he got a fucking Joe Rogan spot. He absolutely will be championed as a fucking hero. I mean, look at the low budget Jeffrey Epstein, Andrew Tate, Russell Brand. There are so many prominent examples of this nonsense. And the Republicans will be eating that shit up, dude.
Is a joke. But the one thing that I actually do agree with the NCRI on is that the spread of content promoting political violence is a sign of a deeply, deeply unhealthy democratic society. Don Caldwell, editor-in-chief of Know Your Meme, said that the reason pro-assassination memes have become so popular is because they're cathartic. Especially when people feel powerless and there are events happening in the world that are out of their control, people use these memes as a release. Josh Citarella, a researcher who studies extremism, told me that these memes are exploding in popularity right now because, quote, the liberal project has basically failed. People do not believe in a lawful and orderly society anymore. The enormous accumulation of wealth and power by oligarchs invalidates the rule of law. The end result is that you can theoretically have executions in the public square. That's what we're going back to. People are advocating for these things on social media because the rules don't matter anymore. In a recent piece in The Nation titled "The Age of the Assassination Meme is Here," Alex Peter writes, quote, assassination discourse has become ambient, not quite satire, not quite sedition, a feeling, a refusal to say what you mean because meaning things can actually be dangerous. And yet people do mean things. The line between the person who's joking and the person who's serious has never been thinner. At the heart of all of this is a kind of disassociation. It's an inability to process the enormity of collapsing. Fascism is rising. Healthcare is a game show. We're all screaming into the void. Is it really so surprising that the language of internet memes and murder has started to overlap? Peter notes that the phrase, quote, when it happens has become both a threat and a prayer. As Citarella explained, COVID, Gaza, and all the events over the past few years have revealed just how many people's lives are truly expendable. We see the government pushing the idea that poor, immunocompromised, disabled, and trans people are better off dead. Tens of thousands of innocent children in Gaza are deemed expendable. These memes are saying, okay, if slaughtering people is deemed acceptable by the state, then why can't we slaughter the people actually doing harm? Citarella said, quote, I think there was an era of liberal society in which there was a generally agreed upon value of the individual. You would even grant your enemies certain imbued or alienable rights. As much as people might have despised a certain person in power or whatever, they would also kind of have this moral conviction that they would not root for this person's bodily harm. The majority of people supported more discursive political means like voting and peaceful protests. But I don't think that's the consensus anymore. I think we're sitting on top of a pressure cooker. Advocating for political assassinations is the most clear sign that millions of people no longer have hope in our system. If there was any sort of legible or coherent plan by people in power to improve things for average people and hold those like Trump and Elon to account, the public would have faith that someone, anyone, was steering the ship. But because there's no plan and no one in power, especially the Democrats, seem to want to save us, people are seeking extreme solutions. And I just want to point out once again that the right has long embraced this style of extreme rhetoric. They've openly supported violent vigilante justice for years by turning figures like Kyle Rittenhouse and Derek Chauvin into right-wing heroes, rewarding them with an endless stream of money and media opportunities. And to give you...
And George Zimmerman before then as well, like virtually every person that has killed a black person has become a fucking hero.
A few more examples. In 2019, Marjorie Taylor Greene posted a Facebook video accusing Nancy Pelosi of treason and saying that she had committed crimes punishable by death. Greene has advocated for the execution of prominent Democrats, including Barack Obama, Hillary Clinton, as well as FBI.
This always happens too. Like, they'll always be like, the left is so violent. The left is so violent. And it's like, dude, what the fuck are you talking about? Have you seen the average right winger? And the same shit happened with like Jeremy Corbyn. Like, I was reminded of the time when in the UK at the heat of Corbyn panic, there was a video that came out of like the special forces, like RAF soldiers shooting at a target, and then it flips over to the target and the target is Jeremy Corbyn. Like, shit like that was so fucking commonplace. People were just like so open to just making leftist figures like their fucking targets and shit. Whereas, God forbid you even say something about, I don't know, the UK's complicity in genocide.
Agents. Lauren Boebert and other Republican members of Congress flaunt guns openly and call for violence against migrants. In 2020, Donald Trump Jr. posted a photo on Instagram holding an AR-15 rifle adorned with Crusader imagery and the phrase "Do Vault," a slogan associated with the medieval crusades that has been adopted by violent far-right extremist groups.
Well, good thing now a guy with a tattoo, with the tattoo on that of that phrase on his body is the, you know, Secretary of Defense.
Kevin Roberts, the president of the Heritage Foundation, the architect of Project 2025, basically said that the United States is undergoing a second American revolution that might not be bloodless. Matt Shea, a former Republican Washington state representative, distributed a manifesto that advocated for the killing of all non-Christian males who refuse to follow biblical law. Republicans frequently speak about executing migrants, undocumented immigrants, disabled and trans people, and others who they feel are undesirable. For instance, in 2024, Republican Congressman Mike Collins tweeted about Chilean dictator Augusto Pinochet's practice of executing political opponents by throwing them from helicopters. He suggested killing a migrant arrested in New York by giving them, quote, a free helicopter ride. As the 2024 article in The Nation notes, quote, the state isn't anti-violence, it's anti-unsanctioned violence.
Yep.
Murder is only inappropriate if it
Up in this bitch, but yes, the state maintains a monopoly on violence. And politics is, at its very essence, about who gets to do violence and who gets to be victims of violence. That's what it's about.
Happens in the wrong direction. Hence, the rise of assassination memes. Jamie Cohen, the academic, said, quote, Gen Z especially feels powerless in this system, and they're posting this content because it's their way of expressing their emotions and feelings about not having power. There's a collective nihilism online right now, and these memes show people aren't alone in those thoughts. These memes may feel glib, but they exist within a framework of real political breakdown. They're a symptom of a profoundly sick society. But it's not sick in the way that most people would think. In my opinion, it's not sick that people want to unalive Trump and the billionaires who are responsible for so much suffering. It's sick that people in power have normalized such obscene levels of systemic violence, especially against marginalized groups. The "someone's gotta do it" memes also show how inadequate traditional political language is in describing what we're all going through right now. The ways that people, especially young people, express themselves online by being ambiguous, sarcastic, and kind of ironic are actually adaptive behaviors. People are trying to articulate the outrage and desperation that they feel at a time when too much directness will get you punished. That's why all these memes allow for a certain level of plausible deniability. This is also part of why attempts to suppress these types of memes, whether from the left or the right, tend to backfire. Treating them like traditional criminal threats rather than cultural signals misdiagnoses the root problem. It escalates distrust and it reinforces the perception that the system doesn't actually fear violence, it simply won't tolerate dissent. And I'd argue that the more expressions like this are punished, the more they're validated in the eyes of those who share the public's underlying frustrations. But what I hope I've shown you in this video is that the "someone needs to do it" meme is not just about venting frustration. It's a cultural phenomenon shaped by years of policy failure, betrayal, and institutional decay. It represents a widespread recognition that no meaningful change is coming from traditional political structures, especially the Democratic Party, and that basic terms of our social contract have eroded beyond repair. But if we want this energy to lead anywhere productive, we have to do more than just analyze the meme's popularity. We have to confront the larger question of what now? What should we actually do if nothing's changing? To answer that, we need to talk about the erosion of collective memory. One of the most significant political projects of the last 4 years has been the campaign to make us forget 2020. Forget the mutual aid, forget the federal eviction moratorium, forget the expanded unemployment benefits, forget the free childcare, forget the brief glimpse we had of a government responding to people's needs instead of corporate profits. Forget the spontaneous uprisings. Forget
I wouldn't even say that it was like the government responding to people's needs. It was more so that it was forced to respond. It was forced to respond because like otherwise America would no longer be the primary consumption engine of the planet and the entire global marketplace would collapse.
At the decentralized
This
care
was
networks,
excellent video.
forget the sense that ordinary people were capable of coordination, compassion, and solidarity. This revisionist erasure is essential to ushering in fascism, because if people remembered what was possible, they might demand it again. Instead, we've been fed a steady diet of manufactured moral panic controversies, false normalcy, and an intentional abandonment of public health and labor protections. The goal was never just to end pandemic safety measures. It was to obliterate the idea that a different kind of society had ever been glimpsed. But not everyone forgot, and that's part of why we're seeing the language of frustration grow sharper, darker, and harder to police. These memes are vague and ironic, but the emotion behind them is grief mixed with clarity. People see that the institutions meant to protect us won't, and the politicians meant to represent us don't. I see these memes as collective outrage begging for structure. This brings us to the ultimate challenge. How do we transform this bubbling outrage into systems that can survive and resist the slow collapse that we're all living through? This is not something we can vote our way out of. Both political parties have shown their willingness to align with fascism, ignore genocide, and abandon the disabled to mass death. No amount of messaging or getting out the vote will realign a system that views basic survival as a partisan issue. Instead, we have to rebuild what was briefly visible in 2020: community care, mutual aid, and horizontally organized support systems that bypass state structures and center vulnerable people. And while organizing things like a food drive or Venmoing a friend for groceries is really, really great, what we need most is to design durable, long-term frameworks for collective survival. This means infrastructure, supply chains, legal defense networks, tenant unions, recentering public health, and it means doing all of this while also being honest about the scale of collapse that we're facing. To do any of this, we have to undo the propaganda that told us that individualism is the rational response to state collapse. This means undoing years of propaganda claiming things like masking is a personal choice and not collective care, that solidarity is weakness, or that we need to sacrifice vulnerable groups so the rest of us can live in normalcy. This means refusing to normalize mass death, whether it's here or abroad. Throw trans and other vulnerable people under the bus just because a politician told you that that's the price of winning. We're running out of time to do this stuff. If we don't want to wake up in a fully authoritarian state, we have to stop waiting for top-down reform. If we let these memes and moments pass by without building on them, I think we're going to end up in a really bleak place. We're going to witness what usually happens when authoritarianism and oligarchs take power. Most people will accept a slow decline. They'll retreat further into individualism and focus on caring for their immediate family over others and exit the political arena entirely. Authoritarianism rarely takes control through force. It's usually just through resignation. But these memes show how many people do still care. They prove that there is a desire for change, even if it hasn't yet found form. And as we build the structure and strategy, we need to recognize that the most subversive thing we can do right now is protect each other, because obviously no one in power will. Someone does need to do it. Not the thing that the meme implies, but the thing that no one wants to admit is necessary. Building something new outside the system with each other. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to my tech and online culture newsletter, usermag.co.
Come on, let's get her over 100K on the sub count, dude.